Gender language for God. Within recent decades, a debate has raged about the use of gender language in relation to God. Most particularly, this debate has had to do with whether it is appropriate to retain use of Father and Son language for God. The concern is that by insisting on calling God Father, the Church has hardened the patriarchal and sexist tendencies latent in Western culture, so such tendencies have acquired a holy stamp of approval. When this is combined with the fact that all the authors of the Bible, so far as we can tell, were men, the great bishop theologians have been men, and many denominations refuse to ordain women and deny leadership positions to them simply on gender grounds, it can be argued that the Church has indeed been patriarchal and sexist. It is significant that the first generation of feminist theologians were nearly all Roman Catholic. The Catholic Church has claimed that priests must be male because only a male priest can adequately image a male Christ, and only a male Christ can adequately image a male God. Though it cannot be denied that there have been examples of patriarchalism and sexism within the history of the Church, it is by no means universal, nor does it go back to the roots of the faith. Using in Father and Son language to refer to God is not meant to say that God the Father is kind of like human fathers, or that God the Son is kind of like human sons. In fact, the opposite is the case. Jesus tells his followers to call no man Father, because our Father is in heaven. In light of the previous section about how words function both in the Bible and in subsequent church history, it should be clear that there is nothing intrinsic to the idea of earthly human fatherhood that makes the word father more accurate to describe God than mother, or any of a number of alternatives. The word father is taken up by God and radically redefined to have its full and final meaning in God alone. This means that far from being a tool for patriarchalism and sexism, which has been done all too often, the fatherhood of God should be the strongest critique of those tendencies. After all, if the word father is defined by God and not by human fathers, it stands in judgment of all the evil that our fathers have ever done, intentionally or unintentionally, to us or to others. In fact, it is because God has declared to us this is what fatherhood actually looks like that we can judge human fathers to be in the wrong when they behave in evil ways. If God the Father is not a patriarchal jerk, which he is not, patriarchalism can find little support for itself from the example of God, even if we call God Father. There seems to be something of an arbitrary character of the use of father and son language rather than mother-daughter or the gender-neutral parent-child. The argument put forward here is that gender simply doesn't enter into the concern at all. In the early church, some of the greatest minds around laughed at the possibility that God might literally be male or female, and that our language bound him to be one way or the other. We are bound to call God Father, not because God is more like human fathers than human mothers, nor because there's anything in the word that can make it function as an analogy, but simply because this is a language taken up by the Bible and even by Jesus himself. It's absolutely crucial that the argument here is claiming that aside from actual biblical usage, there's no reason why God couldn't be called Mother. In fact, there's a multitude of passages throughout both the Old and New Testaments that use female imagery to describe God. If there's no necessity in the nature of God to be called Father, why do we need to do it? Ultimately, this question is the same as why the Jews? After all, if God didn't have to choose Israel and could have chosen another nation, why do we need to pay attention to the Jewish way of thinking? The answer to that question is because God has revealed himself in this way. Since God has actually set the Jews aside and revealed himself in that historical and cultural way, we are not free to overturn it because of our own reasons, perhaps as history has shown, because we do not like the Jews. It is because of this that God has actually taken up the names Father and Son, and not others that we retain them. To invent our own terms other than the ones actually taken up would be idolatry. This way of reasoning works better for the term Father than for Son. After all, God is spirit, and we can see how a spiritual being might be genderless. However, when God became incarnate, he did so as a man. Some have said that this ties God to men in a way that he's not tied to women. Others have said that this makes Jesus fundamentally unrelatable to women. Others still have argued that since God became a man, it means that men are better than women. The first response that must be made is that if God were to become a human being, he had to become either a man or a woman. One might say there was a 50% chance that God himself would become a woman. It might also be argued that God had to accommodate himself to our weakness, and as a female, Christ would not have had a hearing in that patriarchal and sexist time. A male Christ was necessary. By way of a little speculation, which means that this claim is even more tentative than others, we might make the following argument from our observations of the person and work of Christ. We have seen that in Christ, God entered into humanity at its very worst. Instead of saying that Jesus being male means that men are better than women, might it mean that men are worse than women and more in need of redemption? It is certainly another way to think of it.